This new CT Rally looks very different to the previous one. First of all, I think someone needs to have a conversation with the design team at New Balance, but more importantly, the performance has changed a lot. So today I'm going to go over exactly what you should expect with this brand new CT Rally V2. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets Runners. So the previous CT Rally was really the logical successor to the Lav line from New Balance, and it was a very popular shoe. It's been their support and stability shoe for years now, and I don't fully understand why, but they definitely took things back to the drawing board with the release of the V2. Now I'm not going to say whether it's better or worse yet in terms of performance, but the one thing I will say is that I have no idea what they were doing with this design. There's really no nice way to put this. This looks a lot cheaper than the previous one. It looks more like a 996 to me. I know that's purely aesthetics, but that was one thing that was nice about the CT Rally and the Lavs was that they always looked pretty good. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe some people think this is a nice looking shoe, but I'm just not the biggest fan of this design. But that's obviously purely aesthetics. Let's stop talking about that now. Let's talk about some actual performance. But before that, let me just remind you that any of the shoes we talk about on this channel, you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. Also, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me in the store on Instagram, and let me know in the comment section what you want me to cover next. So as you can imagine, with the fact that this new CT Rally looks so different to the previous one, there have been some pretty major changes, with the most notable one being that this now has a full rubber upper rather than the primarily mesh one on the V1. It's also got a more substantial heel cup, a little bit more cushioning. It has a redesigned midsole, which is really interesting. It has a different fit, a new tongue. Basically everything is different. I'll talk about how that all works together as a package in a second, but one important thing to note with all these changes is that this shoe has gotten quite a bit heavier. This weighs 419 grams in a size 9.5 US. The previous one was about 30 grams lighter. So yes, generally speaking, they have made this new CT Rally a little bit bulkier, but it's definitely not as simple as just this is a more support and stability oriented shoe. All these updates have made it feel very different on court, and I'm actually going to start this review talking about the fit and the comfort. So a very interesting thing about the fit here is that New Balance have actually made it a little bit snugger than the previous one. Usually when a brand makes a shoe bulkier, trying to make it more supportive and stable, they make it a little bit wider, they put a bit more room throughout the upper, like Asics did with the Gel Resolution X. I noticed this as soon as I stepped into the shoe. It's a little bit narrower in the forefoot, and especially the height of the shoe around the front top of my foot is lower. Then in the heel, it's definitely a little bit more snug back here too. Not in an uncomfortable way, but you can definitely tell there's more material there grabbing onto your heel to keep it locked in. It's not so much on the inside of the heel. There's about the same amount of cushioning as there was on the previous one, but it's this external heel counter. There's about twice the amount of plastic there was on the previous Rally. So again, it's snugger, but not uncomfortable. I want to make that clear, but it goes along with what I was saying earlier about everything getting a little lower volume with this shoe. I will say at first, I wasn't necessarily a fan, especially with that lower profile toe box. It almost feels like it's stopping my foot from going as deep into the shoe as possible. But once I broke them in, I think I actually like this update. This makes the shoe overall more responsive, which I'll talk much more about once I get into the movement section of the review. The other thing we need to address here regarding comfort is the upper, which I mentioned earlier is now fully encased with rubber. That's very different to the full mesh material that was used on the previous one, and that might sound like it should make the shoe stiffer, less forgiving, and less comfortable, but that's not the case at all. While the mesh on the previous CT Rally certainly wasn't uncomfortable, it did have this stiffness to it, especially out of the box, that I didn't really like that much. I think if you're gonna go full mesh like that, you might as well make it soft. The whole idea with mesh instead of rubber is comfort, and that just wasn't one of those buttery soft and super comfortable mesh materials. Interestingly enough, this upper is actually a little bit softer than the one that was on the previous CT Rally, which is awesome and actually quite impressive considering rubber is usually a less forgiving material. This is very adaptive, so if you do have little protrusions in your foot, or you just want an upper that molds well to your foot, this definitely does that. It's one of the most comfortable full rubber uppers out there, similar to the previous Gel Resolutions, for example. Then you've got the tongue, which is also super comfortable. It's one of those big poofy tongues, especially with this foam insert here in the middle and on the top of the sides. That's always really nice to get a comfortable fit. and to lock the shoe down to your foot. Because the tongue is so thick, you can pull the laces tight without really worrying about lace bite. And yes, they have added a very effective lacing system here. You've got these little ribbons here on the medial side of the upper, and that just helps you to compress the shoe really effectively down onto your foot. Not in an uncomfortable way, just in a very responsive and locked in way. Again, I'll talk more about that later. But overall, this is a really nice fit. It's definitely a little bit snugger than the last one, but I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's not uncomfortably tight in any way, and after just a bit of break-in, everything fits very naturally. Now there is one big caveat with the comfort here. It has nothing to do with the upper, but rather the midsole. So I'm gonna move on to the cushioning and ride now. Before I get into what's so unique about the midsole, let me first go over the standard stuff here. As we've come to expect with rallies and labs, there is a lot of cushioning. New Balance uses their Fresh Foam X material here, which is softer than the Fuel Cell you'll find on the Coco and the 996. And like I was saying earlier, there is ever so slightly more here than there was on the previous one. That was already quite a cushioned shoe, especially after you broke it in and softened it up a little bit. And it's the same thing here. This is plush. Not over the top like a GP Turbo or anything like that, but it's just got a nice soft feel to it. What's so unique here, and this might be the biggest change coming from the previous CT Rally, but it's the actual texture of the midsole. I know that's a weird word to use here, but it's the literal topography of the midsole. This has one of the weirdest initial step-in feels of any court shoe I've ever tried, starting with the heel. It feels like you're stepping on a literal hill back here. Basically, the midsole itself is really rounded out. It's a lot more normal in the forefoot, or at least there are a lot of other tennis shoes that are like it. It's almost like a Nike Vapor where it is a little bit higher here on the medial side, which tilts you inwards. This is a pretty typical thing to do with tennis shoes because it makes you feel nice and responsive when you're in the ready position on returns or split stepping. So that's normal enough, just be ready for an angled forefoot. But let's go back to that fit in the heel. I was not a fan of this really round protrusion in the midsole at first. For one, it feels quite aggressive and actually pushes into you, which is a little bit uncomfortable. And two, it just feels unstable. The thing is, after you break in this midsole, it actually feels very positive. It doesn't take very long to get there, but once you've softened up the foam, you've stepped into the shoe a little bit, it almost feels like that midsole material molds to the bottom of your foot. It's really cool. It's almost like you've thrown in a custom footbed in there. And for me, because I have a high arch, it really cups me in there and makes it so that the base of my foot is in contact with more of the midsole. If you have used a custom footbed before, you'll know that's a very positive sensation because it feels like you have a little more control over the base of the shoe. The one thing I will say is that I don't think this would work very well if you did want to add a custom footbed in here. I think the two would just be a little bit overkill and they'd fight each other, so I'd probably start without one. But I know most people don't use a custom footbed, and this just provides one of the most unique personalized feels of any shoe in stock form. I threw on a Vapor to test side by side at one point, and it's just crazy how much of a difference this makes. It really feels like the bottom of the shoe is molded to your foot, and I'll talk about this more in the movement section, but it makes for such a responsive sensation when you're running around. The other thing that's important to understand here, and we have had a few issues with this fitting the shoe in store, but this shoe actually feels much firmer out of the box than it does even after like 10 minutes of play. I guess that Fresh Foam just needs to be moved around a little bit to activate that plushness. It was a similar thing for me with the first CT Rally, so just give it a bit of time. It will eventually get very soft and comfortable. But I am a massive fan of the cushioning and ride here. Now let's move on to support and stability, because that's obviously a very important characteristic for a shoe that carries the CT Rally or LAV name. Okay, so earlier I was talking about how you have this little mound in the heel that makes you feel unstable. I want to make it very clear that goes away after break-in, but this still isn't one of those rock solid bricks on your feet. This cushioning combined with that textured platform you're standing on makes this more of an adaptive shoe than something like a Gel Resolution, a Court FF, or a Barricade. It's not wobbly, but even compared to the last CT Rally, you're not quite as grounded in this shoe. And like I was saying earlier, the shoe has gotten a little bit narrower too, so the platform isn't as laterally stable either. I'm not saying you're gonna have issues with stability and support here, but if you are used to the beefier old lavs or just more solid shoes in general, this may be a bit too much of a stretch to switch to. I also know this might come as somewhat of a surprise considering the changes they've made with beefing up the heel counter, making the shoe a little bit heavier, but I think a lot of that extra weight went into the midsole cushioning, which is a little bit more substantial, and that doesn't really help with stability. The heel cupping is great though. I'm being a little critical about the overall stability, but there is basically no lateral motion back there, which is the most important part of the foot to lock down for providing a stable feel. So it's definitely adequate. Now I do want to talk about lockdown independent of support and stability because they are different. Lockdown is how closely a shoe fits to your foot and how one-to-one it reacts to your input. And it's extremely important for a shoe to have good lockdown if it's not elite for stability. The lockdown here is really, really good. And that's a big improvement coming from the previous lab. Like I was saying, the heel is super secure, but it's more than just that. This lacing system and this upper that's more snug compress around your foot to provide this really solid cage-like sensation. Again, not in an uncomfortable way, just in a very responsive way that moves one-to-one with your foot. So I was very impressed by the lockdown here. Honestly, that's one area where I thought the previous one was really lacking. It wasn't a responsive shoe. Felt like you had this stiff upper that wouldn't bend and form to your foot that well, so my foot would move around in the shoe, and it created the sensation of the shoe lagging. That's pretty much completely gone here, and when you combine that with this super adaptive midsole, well, that's a great combination for moving around the court. I was not expecting this from a CT Rally, but this has really transformed into one of those super adaptive shoes that responds extremely precisely to your input. A lot of more stability oriented shoes like the previous CT Rally are stable, but they're not very responsive. Another example of that would be the current Gel Resolution X, which got bulkier but also sloppier than the previous one. It's the opposite here. That combination of the molded midsole and the responsive and locked in upper makes it so that the shoe is so glued to your feet that it actually feels lighter and quicker despite being technically heavier. There's really not that much rollover on lateral cuts anymore, and push-offs are much more efficient than you would expect from a shoe with this stack height and this level of cushioning. Overall, the whole movement experience has totally changed coming from the previous one, and that was definitely its weakest characteristic, and now I would actually say that that's one of its strong suits. Now the other thing we need to talk about is sliding, and I obviously can't really slide that much with my ankle in the state that it is, but what I will say is that the previous CT Rally was quite a sticky shoe, but once you did start the slide, it was very consistent. I would assume it's a similar thing here. This does have a pretty sticky outsole with this translucent gum rubber, so don't expect it to slide like a Gel Resolution, but I'm sure it'll be okay. I do wish New Balance would make at least one of their shoes better for sliding, but they're clearly not too keen on that. I don't fully understand why, but it's obviously part of their brand philosophy, so I guess we just have to respect that. But yeah, a great shoe for moving around the court in general, and for me, that is the biggest positive update that we got with this new one. So this new CT Rally is a really impressive shoe. If you want something very personalized with a good, close to the foot fit and a lot of cushioning, this could be perfect for you. I also understand if you are a little bit worried about that midsole, especially if you're someone who does use custom footbeds. But once you get used to that molding around your foot, it is a really nice feel. It might be a little bit weird at first, but once you break it in, it just responds so precisely to your input. It reminds me a little bit of the Gel Resolution 9 in that regard, but it does have a very different fit. But overall, a super solid update. Just remember, it's also very different to the previous one. So if you did just want more of the same, that's not really the case here. I'm definitely gonna keep it in my shoe rotation for the next few months because I think responsiveness and cushioning is a really good thing for my ankle right now. But the problem is I really don't like the look of this shoe, and unfortunately I still care about that. But with that said, that is going to be the end of this review. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, if you want to try on the brand new CT Rally V2, you can come visit us in store, or if you want to buy it, you can go online at racketsandrunners.ca.